Hey y'all, I don't know how many people will actually find this useful, but some folks wanted it, so here you go, the Desert Perpetual Epic Raid Guide. Take note, because the first 3 encounters are essentially just slightly modified versions of the regular Desert Perpetual Raid, those sections in this guide are going to be relatively short. Basically, we're just going to be going over what about those encounters got changed between the regular and epic version. Otherwise, this would be like a 3-hour video. If you want full descriptions on how these encounters go normally, please check out the regular Desert Perpetual Raid Guide, which I will link down in the pinned comment. The majority of today's guide will be focused on the all-new final boss encounter, which is going to take a minute to explain. Alright, one important thing in the Epic Raid you should know right away is that each encounter will feature a Annoy the Guardian mechanic from whatever the previous encounter was. For example, if your team does the Hobgoblin encounter, which features the oh-so-fun mechanic of having to avoid a death laser countdown timer, and then after beating that encounter you go into the Wyvern encounter, then during Wyvern encounter DPS you will have to again deal with avoiding death lasers, which is being borrowed from the Hobgoblin encounter. So in short, the rule of thumb is whatever encounter you go into will feature the Annoying the Guardian mechanic from the previous encounter you just did. For your very first encounter you do in the Epic Raid, it will always feature the blue beams coming down from the sky mechanic, which you might remember from DPS phase of regular Koregos. Just something to keep in mind. Alright, kicking things off, the Hydra encounter changes. Again, this will not go over the entire Hydra encounter, but rather the changes made to the Hydra encounter from the regular DP raid. First, there are 2 new sets of what I'm gonna call eye callouts, one outside of the left room, and that one is kind of on a slant, be aware of that, and then another outside of the right room above the doorway. In the regular DP raid, the flow of communications goes like this. The players in the left and right rooms are communicating directly with one another, telling each other which eyes to shoot on the Hydra shield. In the epic raid, it goes like this. The player in the left room will now see 2 eyes glowing on their eye callout chart instead of just 1. They communicate that information to one of the outside middle area players, who then must stand in the flashlight eye of the main boss, and while doing so needs to shoot and break both eyes on the brand new left side eye callout display. After shooting and breaking the 2 eyes that were called, one of those eyes will glow. That middle player communicates which one eye is glowing to the player who is in the far right room, and only then does that player shoot and break the one that is on the shield of the far right Hydra. In short, breaking the eyes on the shields in the Hydra rooms is a bit more of a complicated process now than it was before. Another change, every time a set of eyes is destroyed by the side room players, 3 Vex detainment enemies will spawn out of every Hydra. Yes, that means the 2 Hydras in the side rooms and the big Hydra in the middle. There's going to be a lot of detainment going on, so be on alert and call for help if you get detained. Final change, during DPS. Epoptes will now have 4 rotating shields instead of just 2. And when 2 players' names are chosen via the in-game text in the bottom left, rather than having to rotate around the boss and break eyes on the shield, now both players will immediately get teleported into a side room where they'll have to rotate around the mini Hydra, staying in the flashlight eye beam and breaking all the eyes, including the middle eye. When they've done that, they'll get teleported back out to the middle, where they'll have to now shoot and break 2 of the 4 rotating shield eyes, and then they can resume DPS. Alright, the Hobgoblin encounter. In the epic Hobgoblin encounter, you have to power up the Vex coils at the beginning of the encounter, but this time there are different color sands, and you can only power up the coil if you run through it holding the correct color. How do you know if you're holding the correct color or not? Well, there's now a big rotating ring in the middle of the map hovering above the Mohawk. When sand begins to drop from dead Minotaurs, you can pick up a piece of sand and then jump through the rotating ring. Whatever color you jump through with, you'll be able to see what coils require that specific color in order to properly turn on. You should be looking for this, the little glass jar of sand hanging on the side of the coil. If the jar shows that color, you need that color. If the jar is empty, that means it requires a different color, and somebody has to jump through the ring holding a different color to to see what new sand will now appear on the side of the coil. Also, the locations where the minotaurs normally spawn in will also have glass jars with a particular sand color on display. That means that when you kill the minotaur that spawns there, it will drop that color of sand. Keep in mind that every time a player jumps through the middle ring holding any color of sand, the minotaur sand colors will also get RNG shuffled around, so players always need to be paying attention. When you know what all the sand colors are for each coil, make sure they're written in the in-game chat, because later when you need to repower up 4 of the 5 coils, you will still need that color sand for that particular coil, so that is pretty annoying, so make sure you have them all written down. Another change, there will be 4 hobgoblins up on perches instead of just 3, and during DPS, Agreos will only spend some time on the ground, but when he teleports off to do his kill shot attack, he will then remain up on the balcony for the remainder of DPS. Every now and then, after a certain amount of time has gone by, he will teleport to a different balcony, keeping players on their toes. Finally, Agreos has a final stand now. When you hit final stand, he will teleport down to the ground level again. Players now will need to all go and stand on the 3 different plates. I recommend 2 players for each plate. And then, depending on the buff name that you get from that plate, that determines which clone you now need to go and kill. There are 3 clones in total, and again, you can only damage the clone whose name matches your Vex plate buff. Move fast, and when all 3 clones are dead, you can now damage and kill the real Agreos before final stand ends. Moving on, the Wyvern encounter. Rather than minotaurs spawning in the dead center of the map, now minotaurs will spawn 2 at a time on the 3 sides of the map, so to speak. Also, the floating ring where you need to dunk your sand will now be forever spinning. Also, you won't be able to dunk whatever color sand you want through the big ring. Each time you attempt the Wyvern encounter, there will be a set order for sand dunking. Meaning, for example, you may have to dunk in the order of red and then blue and then white. Or it might even be white and then blue and then red. Who knows? Actually, you can know by finding and standing on a small white plate on the floor, aka the temporal oculus buff. It'll show you what color the ring is glowing, and that'll tell you what color sand needs to go through the ring next. I recommend the players jump through the ring in groups of 2, each holding the same color sand the ring needs at that moment. Again, have a player check the temporal oculus so you know what color needs to go next, and remember that color rotation. If later on you need to dunk more sand into the hourglass to extend the encounter timer, you'll need to make sure that you're still following the sand order, or else your guardian will die when they jump through the ring. Here's another change. Whoever on the team is doing the role of climber will see 3 jars with different color sand. It can be any combination of the 3 colors, and you may get duplicate or even triplicate colors. The colors shown in the jars are essentially telling you which cube the tower shooters need to shoot. It is no longer everyone shoot the bottom cube and then everyone shoot the middle cube and then everyone shoot the top cube. It is now determined by the sand colors in the jar. Look at this diagram. Blue sand means shoot the top cube, white sand means shoot the middle cube, and red sand means shoot the bottom cube. So if you're in a situation where there's 1 sand of each color, that means 1 player needs to shoot the bottom cube during the rhythm game, 1 player needs to shoot the middle cube, and 1 player has to shoot the top cube. Again, all at the exact same moment, just like the original Wyvern encounter. It's going to be a little bit difficult to figure out on the fly who's going to be shooting the top cube, who is going to be shooting the bottom cube, etc. I recommend you have a cube shot caller who is telling each person to shoot which cube. Also, for the tower players who are shooting the cubes in the tower, you can only shoot and break the cubes of the tower if you've gotten a Vex plate buff first. And depending on the name of the plate buff you have received, that determines which of the 3 towers you need to shoot. Again, check my diagram. I have the towers labeled clearly here. After shooting and breaking a cube, tower players may notice that their buff name has changed, so be sure to pay attention to that. All right, the final encounter. Your objective is to kill Koregos, who will have multiple very odd DPS phases. At least 2 of those DPS phases will happen at very close range, possibly 1 far away DPS phase, which we're going to call aerial DPS, and then at the very end you'll have a final stand DPS phase. When the encounter begins, drop down into the main area, begin the encounter, and try to stay alive while killing Vex. You may notice that all 3 bosses from the previous encounters will be alive and in the area for a short duration until eventually teleporting away. You won't be able to damage them just yet. They'll be immune to all damage, but we'll eventually end up killing them, just not now. We'll get to that a little bit later. For right now, just stay alive. A few moments after the fight begins, 2 players will be chosen at random to receive a debuff called Banishment. Everyone on the fire team will eventually get this debuff, but it can only be held by 2 players on the team at a time. Meaning, when the first 2 players on the fire team acquire Banishment, it is their job, so to speak, to essentially pass the Banishment debuff over to 2 different members of the fire team. Then it'll get passed on to the final 2 members of the fire team, who will then eventually get rid of it completely for the remainder of the round. The Banishment debuff can be passed on via 2 different methods. One method is by jumping into a large open triangle-shaped Vex portal. Sounds easy, but on the other side, there's a whole bunch of annoying Vex to deal with, and you kind of have to fight your way out. More on that shortly. The other method is by simply interacting with one of these, a small white Vex cube that can be found in the main area. So you might wonder, well, if those are the 2 options, why the fuck would anyone want to go through the portal and do all that nonsense when you can just interact with the cube? Good question. And the reason is that there are only 4 Vex cubes in the main room, and every time you interact with one to get rid of your debuff, they vanish. Meaning that eventually, sooner or later, 2 players on the fire team must go through the giant portal in order to get rid of their debuff. Here's how your team should decide on who goes through the portal. As I mentioned, the game will give the Banishment debuff to 2 players randomly. Whenever 2 players receive the Banishment debuff, one of the 3 large triangle Vex portals in the room will basically open up. I want to be clear, if it's your first time in this encounter, the giant triangle portals may always look open, but they may actually be closed. If a portal looks like this, aka it has kind of a boxy checkered pattern on it, that means the portal is closed. However, if a portal looks like this, aka it's kind of more scattered with stars, that means that portal has just opened. But again, when 2 players get the Banishment debuff, one of the 3 large triangle portals will officially open. Whenever that happens, simply look at that large Vex portal that just opened. If the portal does not have a thin blue beam coming out of it, that means the 2 players who were given the Banishment debuff should simply interact with the Vex cube in the main room. Let's say that situation happens exactly, and the Banishment debuff has now been passed along to 2 different members of the fire team. Now, a second one of the 3 large triangle Vex portals will now also open up. If that giant portal has a thin blue beam coming out of it, those 2 players who just got the debuff should go into that portal. The blue beam is tied to a large green crystal that we'll talk about later, but for now, simple rule of thumb, does the portal that just opened up have a blue beam coming out of it? If yes, those 2 players who just got the Banishment debuff should go in. If no, those 2 players who just got the Banishment debuff should pass it on via the small Vex white cubes in the main area. Okay, so the 2 banished players who have the thin blue line coming out of the portal jump on in together. While in that new area, there's going to be a fair amount of Vex in there. You can ignore 99% of them. What you really want to make sure you do is kill the Vex Cyclops at the very back of the room. Reason being, when the Vex Cyclops in the portal room is dead, and the other Vex Cyclops back in the main room is also dead, your portal home will open, and the players who went into the portal room can now actually go through that portal and return to the main area. But before they do, one of the 2 players who went through needs to find this, a Vex plate, and stand on it to activate it. Just like the other encounters, you'll get a buff, which you'll see at the top of your screen. Get that plate buff, kill the Cyclops, and hopefully your teammates in the main room have killed all 3 of their Cyclopses. I mean, technically they only need to kill the one blocking your return portal, but why not kill the other 2 Cyclopses, right? Anyway, the portal will reopen and the 2 players can jump through the portal and return back to the main area. Now, the player who returned to the main area with the Vex plate buff needs to do the following. Find the giant glowing green crystal in the main room, look at it with a clear line of sight, and then the game will give you the option to activate it, even if you're far away, with text that says, destroy temporal locus. Do that, and you'll basically open the crystal. Now, anybody else on your team who does not have a Vex plate buff, which at this point should be literally any of your other 5 teammates, should shoot the open crystal until it breaks completely. After you do that, things are gonna eventually fade to black, and you're gonna think, what the hell? Did we wipe or something? And no, you didn't. It's actually all part of the encounter, believe it or not. But before things fade to black though, look around the area, for this. There will be hanging cages in the area that will all show the same color of sand. I'm not kidding when I say that you literally went through that entire process just for that information, the color of the sand in that jar right there. So before things fade to black, remember the color of the sand, type it in the chat if you need to. Okay, if you did everything correctly, it'll fade to black. You'll get a message that says world lines fracture around you, and you'll be back at the start of the final boss encounter. Again, all part of the plan. Drop a new rally flag and hop down into the area. You'll now notice this. There are going to be 3 sand canisters around the outer edge of the main area. Using my god tier drawing, you'll see that there are 3 sand color locations total, 1 for each color. Earlier, just before we faded to black, we got the info on the color of the sand in the hanging jar. Now, when phase 2 begins, just have one player go to whatever color of sand you saw at the end of phase 1, and when the encounter begins, just turn to that jar of sand and hit align. Aligning the right color of sand is important because it determines what color of sand a special enemy will drop when killed later on. Okay, it is phase 2, and things are basically going to go down almost the exact same way that they did in phase 1, meaning players will get the banishment debuff in groups of 2, and if your big triangle portal does not have a thin blue line coming out of it, that means you're going to clear your banishment debuff by interacting with the small white Vex cube in the main room. However, if your portal does have a thin blue line coming out of it, you and your teammate are jumping on in. However, this time, 2 things will be different. Thing number 1, you'll need to find and kill one of these, a Vex imp. Killing that imp will spawn a special enemy back in the main area for your 4 teammates to deal with. More on that in a minute. Thing number 2, though, the portal team will now have a mini game they have to complete while off in Portal Land. The minigame will actually be completely different depending on what former boss the game throws at you when you jump through your portal. Let's go through all 3. If you're facing the Hobgoblin, do the following. 1 player grabs the Vex Plate buff, 1 does not. If you're standing on the area sort of beneath the Goblin, you'll notice that on the wall, directly under the Goblin, you'll see 3 Vex eyes. The player with the Vex Plate buff will see 1 of these 3 eyes glowing. They just need to call out which eye is glowing, and the player without the Vex Plate buff will shoot and break that eye. Rinse and repeat until all 3 eyes are shot and broken, and then you can damage and kill the Hobgoblin. If you're facing the Hydra, 1 person grabs the Vex Plate buff, 1 does not. Like the original Hydra encounter, it'll have a shield rotating with a bright glowing flashlight eye. The player with the Vex Plate buff should stand in the path of the flashlight eye and stay there. Now, both players should look around the area at the 3 nearby Vex coils. Each player will see 1 coil glowing red and 2 coils that look more bluish, but you'll each see different ones color-wise. Meaning basically whichever one that you both see is glowing blue is the correct coil. So communicate with your teammate, and when you've identified the 1 coil that you both see as blue, the player without the Vex Plate buff needs to jump on top of the coil and interact with the Vex cube up there. When they've done that, the player with the Vex buff can now shoot and break the glowing flashlight eye on the Hydra, which should break its shield. Then you can both kill the Hydra. If you're facing the Wyvern, neither of you actually needs to activate the Vex Plate buff. In this minigame though, there should be 2 large Vex cubes in the room, kind of like in the original Wyvern encounter. You and your partner need to do just what you did in the OG Wyvern encounter. Each of you needs to shoot a different cube at the exact same time, specifically just before the 4th beat goes blue in the diastole rhythm counter up top. If you do it correctly, both cubes will break and then respawn somewhere else in the room. Also, detained squids will spawn out of the broken cube, so go ahead and watch out for those. Rinse and repeat. Do it correctly 3 times and the minigame will complete. You can now damage and kill the Wyvern. No matter what minigame you play though, and which side boss you kill, the end result is the same. If you either stepped on the Vex Plate at any point during the minigame, or if you got the final blow on the mini-boss, you'll get the Vex Plate buff, which will appear at the top of your screen, and you and your teammate can now both leave the portal. One of you who has the buff, doesn't matter who, again, look at the crystal and then hit the activation button to open it up like how you did in phase 1. Then any of your other teammates who does not have any buff of any kind can shoot and break the crystal, and now your first ever session of DPS can begin. But wait, pause real quick. While the team of 2 players were off in Portal Land playing their fun little minigame spiel, spiel with one of the Vex mini bosses, what the hell were the other 4 players doing? Great question. Rewind. All right, while the 2 portal players are off doing their thing, the other 4 players, still in the main room, should do the following. 1. Get rid of their banishment debuff by interacting with the 4 small Vex buttons. And then 2. Kill the large Wyvern that spawns in the main room. Remember earlier I mentioned the portal players should find and kill a Vex Imp that will spawn a special enemy back in the main room? Killing the Vex Imp spawns the Wyvern back in the main room. When the Wyvern dies, it will drop 4 Chronons, aka sand. Do y'all remember at the very beginning of Phase 2 when you immediately aligned the correct sand color as the encounter began for the second time? Well, when you eventually kill the Wyvern, it'll drop the color sand of whatever color you attuned. When the Wyvern is dead, all 4 players each grab 1 sand and then look for the hourglass and the spinning ring above it. Head up the ramp and jump through the ring with your sand, depositing it into the hourglass, and when all 4 sands have been deposited, immediately shoot and break the small diamond under the hourglass. The moment you break the diamond on the hourglass, you'll pause the worldline stability meter that has been slowly depleting on the left-hand side of your screen until it is time for DPS. All right, so everyone does what they're supposed to, and now your entire team has their first session of DPS, which you'll basically be doing at point-blank range. Do as much DPS as you can, point-blank, until the worldline stability meter fully depletes, and then again, the instance will fade to black. Again, don't worry, that is supposed to happen. It is super important though that during DPS and before everything fades to black, somebody on the team, for the love of God, look around the main area again to locate this. The color of the caged sand hanging up in the main room, just like before. When everything does fade to black, you're gonna again start the encounter over from the beginning. And just like last time, when you begin the encounter, you'll need to pick 1 color of sand to align right away, and the color of the sand that you see before everything fades to black is the color of the sand you need to align. So we are now running the final encounter for basically Phase 3, and everything is going to run exactly how it did in Phase 2 with 1 teeny extra step. After you drop down and immediately align the correct sand color like you did last time, this time, remember the 3 Vex mini bosses who are all hanging out in the center area who are normally immune to all damage? Well, whatever boss got defeated in the little portal minigame last time, whoever completed that minigame can now straight up kill that mini boss at the beginning of this phase. He'll no longer be immune to all damage. So murder that mini boss, and the other 2 will eventually chicken out and teleport into their portals like normal, and then the encounter carries on exactly the way it did before. Players get the banished debuff in groups of 2. Whoever sees that their portal has a thin blue line coming out of their portal, they go into that portal, find and kill the Vex Imp, and then complete their minigame. Meanwhile, the remaining 4 players stay in the main room, they cleanse their debuff via the tiny Vex cubes, and they kill all 3 Cyclopses in the area. When the Wyvern spawns, the 4 main room players will kill it, grab the sand that it drops, jump through the ring, and break the hourglass diamond right away. When the portal players complete their minigame shenanigans and they kill the Cyclops and return through their portal, they use their new buff to look at and open the green crystal, and any player without the buff shoots and breaks the now open crystal, and close range DPS begins again. Now, if you deplete the boss's entire health bar and reach final stand after the second DPS session, great. If you don't, that is also okay, but everything will fade to black again, and you're gonna need to do the entire encounter over again a 3rd and final time. However, when it's time for you to do DPS for a 3rd time instead of close range damage, the boss will teleport off to a different area. You and your team will have to walk up the ramp and head over there, and now we'll talk about what people call the aerial DPS stage. In aerial DPS, the boss will be floating way off in the distance, and you and your team will have 3 Vex plates. 1 on the left, 1 in the middle, and 1 on the right. You should be set up in the following way. 1 player should be standing on each plate, and they will get a Vex plate buff, and the 3 remaining players should be kind of located in the middle area behind the middle plate. The plate steppers should all hop on together, and everyone should begin DPS. boss. Eventually, 3 giant green crystals will appear floating in the air, one to the left, one to the right, and one in the middle. They work just like they did before. Basically, the players on your team with the Vex Plate buff need to simply look at their nearby crystal and hold their interact button to open up the crystal, and then anybody else on the team who does not have a Vex Plate buff needs to shoot it until it breaks. While the crystals are up, DPS on the boss cannot continue, so opening and breaking all 3 crystals as fast as you can is key. When the crystals are broken, DPS can continue, but also take note that the plate debuffs will shift around through your team, meaning if you didn't have a Vex Plate buff before, you might actually have one now. It's kind of RNG. With that in mind, players should shuffle around the map and make sure everyone is maintaining the original positioning, aka one buffed player should be on the left, one in the middle, and one on the right to make sure that they can all look at and open the crystals when the time comes. Keep damaging the boss until you're at the final health bar notch, and now it is time for final stand. Players should leave the area and head over to the final big triangle portal. Before you jump through the portal, be sure to assign each player on your team a number 1 through 6. You'll understand why in a minute. Turn around and kill the Vex Harpy in the middle area, and then turn back and leap through the triangle portal. The moment you jump through the big portal, you'll have one final new minigame before DPS. There will be a platform that appears in front of you with a small Vex cube on it. Whichever player on your team was designated number 1, have them activate the cube. When they do, the platform you're standing on will begin to disappear, and the entire team will now need to jump to a new platform that should appear nearby. Player number 2 on the team should now interact with this white Vex cube, and the platform y'all are standing on will again begin to disappear. Rinse and repeat. Basically, you'll have 6 white cubes that appear one at a time, and your entire team will need to jump from one vanishing platform to another. Everyone on the team should engage with White Vex cube exactly 1 time. And when you do, not only will you summon the next floating platform, but you'll also cure yourself of the banishment debuff that everyone received when jumping through the portal. So each player activates 1 Vex cube, and you collectively all jump all the way up to the top platform, and then final DPS begins. During DPS, you'll have to deal with the same annoying mechanic as before, aka 3 giant green crystals will eventually appear and prevent you from doing any damage to the boss. Again, whoever on your team has randomly been given the gift of a Vex Plate buff needs to look at the crystal, hit the interact button, and open it up, and whoever on the team does not have any kind of buff whatsoever needs to shoot it until it breaks. When all 3 crystals are opened and broken, DPS can continue. Rinse and repeat until the boss is finally dead, and congratulations, the epic raid is done. Thank you very much for watching. Please give this video a like if it helped you in any way, and I'll see you next time.